Welcome to Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum Site Tour Saturday. I'm Patricia Sanford, Director at the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Lab here at the park. Today we're at the Kings Reach site, and behind me you can see our newly completed exhibits. If you visit, you'll be able to learn a lot more about the people and the archaeology that took place at that site. But more on that later. The Kings Reach site represents the remains of a tobacco plantation that was occupied between around 1690 and 1711. Documentary evidence suggests that it was the home of Richard Smith Jr., a wealthy colonist with close ties to the Calvert family. He inherited the property around 1689, built a small house and several structures to go with it, lived there until around 1711, at which time he abandoned this property to build a much larger house down at Peterson's Point. That site, the Smith St. Leonard site, has been the subject of 3 previous Site Tour Saturday videos. The Kings Reach site was discovered in 1981 during an archaeological survey of land that would later become Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum. This survey revealed concentrations of household and structural debris, including nails, brick, glass, ceramics, and tobacco pipe fragments in the field containing the site. Excavations were conducted by the Maryland Historical Trust beginning in 1984 and continuing through 1987 under the direction of Dennis J. Pogue. The site consisted of a plantation core of 2 structures, a main house and a kitchen/quarter for servants or slaves. The main residence and quarter both opened into a fenced yard. Archaeological traces suggest that a 3rd possible structure was located to the south of the main residence and outside the fenced house lot. It is likely that the 2 buildings were occupied by indentured servants or enslaved laborers after the Smith family built their new home at Smith St. Leonard. The Kings Reach site is also associated with a quarter for enslaved laborers located several hundred yards to the east, as well as a large agricultural barn. The archaeological traces of these buildings were also excavated by archaeologists at Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum. Kings Reach was occupied at an important point in the history of Maryland, when the colony's tobacco economy was in a severe and prolonged depression, and the transition to a predominantly slave labor force was well underway. Although Smith was fairly well-to-do, he lived in a house that was built in a way that would need substantial repairs after 20 or 30 years. Artifacts recovered from Kings Reach, striking in their quantity and variety, suggest that Smith invested his wealth in portable household goods rather than in architecture. He also invested heavily in land in Maryland. Numerous subsurface features were revealed and selectively excavated. These remains consisted primarily of soil stains that indicated where structural posts to support the buildings and fence had been located, as well as a number of below-ground storage cellars located within the footprints of both structures, as well as a linear feature thought to be a drainage ditch. The 1-story main dwelling originally measured 20 by 30 feet, divided into a parlor and a kitchen with a sleeping loft above. A 10-foot wide wooden shed extended along the rear of the structure, while a 5 by 7-foot shed was attached to its north wall. This shed is believed to have served as a dairy and contained a below-ground wood-lined pit where milk, cheese, and meat could have been stored at cooler temperatures. The building's source of heat was a wood-framed, mud-lined hood and chimney set on a brick hearth in the kitchen. Although this house may appear small by modern standards, it was actually quite a large home for this time period. An unusual feature of the main house was the presence of 11 small cellars below its wooden floor. In front of the hearth was a possible root cellar for keeping foodstuffs like grain and sweet potatoes warm and dry. The remaining cellars appear to represent successive generations of general storage pits, which were replaced when walls collapsed. After the pits were abandoned, they became a convenient spot to dump household garbage, an action much appreciated by archaeologists 300 years later. The second structure at the site measured 10 by 20 feet and also opened into the fenced yard. This building served as a quarter or home, probably for servants, but possibly for enslaved laborers. During the late 17th century, white indentured servants were beginning to be replaced by enslaved Africans as the primary source of labor on Maryland's tobacco plantations. The Kings Reach site has been the focus of a recent interpretive project completed in the spring of 2020. The original outlines of the site's two buildings have been reconstructed with decks, each with outlines of the subfloor pits that residents dug under the floors of the house. The fenced yard has been reconstructed, and it contains exhibit panels that provide more information on the site and its residents. You can visit the Kings Reach site. It's located on the Riverside Trail near the canoe and kayak launch. Our next Site Tour Saturday segment will be about what artifacts found at the Kings Reach site can tell us about the site, its residents, and their daily lives.